Hello and welcome to my video. My name is Megan Carlson. I'm one of the instructional assistants you can encounter on the Math Center in the Lee campus. Today I want to go over some methods of factoring that might be helpful for you as you go through your classes. Factoring is a pretty versatile skill and you'll find that you'll be using it a lot regardless of what math class you're in, so it's definitely good to just go over some of these methods. So the first thing I want to do is look at a standard factoring problem. In this case, we're looking at x squared plus 8x minus 20. So the first thing I always like to do is note whether or not there is a coefficient in front of your x squared. But it looks like in this case, the coefficient of x squared is just 1. That means we can use the easier approach to our factoring. Whenever that coefficient is 1, all we'll need to do in this case is look at our last term, negative 20, and I want to find all the factors that negative 20 can be. Now, since this term is negative, that means one number is going to be positive and one number is going to be negative. So we could have a negative 1, positive 20, and alternatively, a positive 1, negative 20. I'm going to keep going down the list with all of the possibilities before we proceed with our next step. You don't have to write these in any particular order. I just like to go from ascending order on it. There we go. So once we're at this point, we need to look at which pair of factors here, when combined together, make this middle term 8. So I need to see which ones make a positive 8 together. And from what I see, it looks like these two will do it, because negative 2 plus 10 make 8. So this is where this method's pretty nice, because once we identify the two numbers here, all we'll need to do is when we write our factored form, we have x's in the first part, and then inside of here, we put our two factors that we found, the negative 2 and the positive 10. And we already have our answer here. So we can use this fast approach anytime the coefficient of your first term is a 1. But let's look at some more complicated versions. The next type is one that you might encounter more often, and it's a good thing for us to practice in this case. I'd like to go over what's known as AC method factoring. Now, we want to use AC method anytime your first coefficient is not a 1. Like in this case, we have a coefficient of 3 on our first term. And let me go ahead and highlight that. There we go. Our coefficient is not 1, it's a 3. So we want to use this method. Quadratic equations are typically in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And AC method, just by the name alone, shows that we need to take the product of the a and c term together. So let me write out our problem, and then we'll identify those two terms. 3x squared minus 13x minus 10. There we go. So from here, I identify my a and my c. My a is 3, my c is negative 10. And I multiply those two values together. 3 times negative 10 makes a negative 30. And just like in our previous problem, I now need to list out the factors that make up the negative 30. Just to save some space, when I write these out, I know that one has to be positive and one has to be negative. So in front, I'll just put this symbol here, plus or minus 1, plus or minus 30. And it should imply that if one is negative, the other is positive, and vice versa. Going down my list of factors, once I have all those, just like before, I need to identify which two combine together to make the middle term. So now that I have those, my middle term is negative 13. So when I compare, it looks like what I need is found in this group. In particular, I need a positive 2 and a negative 15, because together they will make negative 13. But this is where this method differs from the previous problem. No longer can I skip right to the end. Instead, I actually need to rewrite the problem again, except our middle term is going to change. So the A term is the same, and the C term is the same, but our B term is now our two factors, the negative 15 and the positive 2. Please note I wrote the negative 15 first, followed by the 2, but we can actually do this in any order. I just like putting the negative term first. So once we get to this point, we're going to act like there's a bit of a barrier between the two halves of our problem. So on one part, I will only look at the first half, and then I'll only look at the second half. And what I want to do is find the greatest common factor for my first two terms. And when I compare those two terms, I notice that they're both divisible by 3, so I can factor 3 out. They also both have the variable x, so I'll factor that out as well. Factoring out 3x from 3x squared leaves an x. Factoring 3x from negative 15x leaves a negative 5. And we can always check that by distributing again. So for example, 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times negative 5 is negative 15x, leaving you back where you were. So it's always good to check that to make sure that at this point we've been working well on it. I now look at my third and my fourth term. 2x minus 10. The only thing they have in common is that they're both divisible by 2. So I'll put a 2 out here. Factoring 2 from 2x leaves me an x. And factoring 2 from negative 10 leaves a negative 5. Now at this point, you're going to note that they both have a common factor of x minus 5. So that's exactly what we're going to factor out now. Since they both have x minus 5 in common, I can place an x minus 5 here. And then to get my second factor, I'm going to say, okay, if I factored x minus 5 in the first term, all that's left is 3x. And if I factor x minus 5 in the second group, all that's left is a 2. Meaning that that's in fact going to be what your other factor is, a 3x and a 2. And with that, we have the factor form for our second problem. So the AC method's not too bad. I recommend using this approach anytime the coefficient of your first term is not 1. Now let's go ahead and look at our final method. Now in this method, we're going to use what's called factor by grouping. I recommend this approach anytime you have 4 terms like you see here. Before we get into the actual factoring, there's always one thing I recommend before we try our problems, and that is seeing if there's a greatest common factor for whatever we're dealing with. So in this problem here, I notice that, well, they all are divisible by 3. So I'm actually going to factor 3 out before we really begin. So our real problem has a 3 out here. Factoring 3 from 3x squared leaves an x squared. Factoring it from 30xy leaves a 10xy. Factoring it from negative 6xy leaves a negative 2xy. And factoring it from negative 60y squared is a negative 20y squared. So this is the problem that we'll be trying to solve. Now, as we saw in our previous problem, when we had the 4 terms, we treated it like there was a barrier between them, and we focused on the first half, followed by the second half. And that still applies here. So this 3 is going to hang out here for a while. But when I look at these 2 terms inside, the x squared and the 10xy, I want to see what factor is in common between them. And they have an x in common. Factoring x from x squared leaves an x. Factoring x from 10xy leaves a 10y. Similarly, I want to now look at my third and my fourth term. They both have a negative 2 in common, so I will factor that out. They also both have a y in common, so I will factor that out. Factoring negative 2y from negative 2xy leaves just an x. And factoring negative 2 from our final term leaves a positive 10y. So let's go ahead and put all this into a nice final form. We have that 3 in front, but they also seem to be sharing a common x plus 10y. So that's our other factor. And then finally, we have the factored out x and the factored out negative 2y. So we have x minus 2y. And with that, we have our final factored problem. I recommend this approach anytime you're dealing with 4 terms. So we went over some examples that you might encounter whenever you're trying to do a factoring problem. If you ever want to have some more help, feel free to contact academic support and schedule a tutoring appointment. Alternatively, you can come in person. I'm in the Lee campus, so if you ever want to come in for help, go to the second floor of Building Q and we'll be glad to help you. We also will be hosting other videos in case you're interested in any more of our content, but feel free to come in or schedule a tutoring appointment. Thank you.